Well, I think we all pretty much know that as human beings, most of the time, we prefer things we know over things that are different or new. I recently went to my children's open house at their elementary school. So I was there and going into my kids' class, went in, talked to the teacher, had a neat time. And then I went out and on the wall there was this corkboard that said, my first day of school. And on it were all these little pieces of paper, little notes that the second graders had written. So I went looking for my son's note. And then I was reading the other ones to see what they would say. And it was interesting that they pretty much all said the same things. Lots of them said, I was excited. Some of them said, I loved my new class, so nice things to hear. And then almost every single one of them also said, I was scared. And that's the normal thing in life, right? This is what we probably all felt in school when we were beginning. We fear what we don't know. And we do this, of course, because we suspect that the things that we don't know might hurt us. And that's not all bad, because a little caution in life is somewhat wise. Not every person you meet in life we know is good, is going to be good to us. Not every scenario we enter in life is safe. So when we meet a situation that's new, it's kind of like coming across a slippery floor sign where our automatic reaction is, danger, danger, this floor might be slippery. And yet, even though a little bit of fear is healthy, where do our lives go if we let our fears take total control? And the answer, of course, is they don't go much of anywhere. It's that classic wisdom, which we've all heard, right? We have to learn to face our fears. Because on some level, unless we're willing to explore the unknown, we cannot become wise, and we cannot learn, and we cannot grow as people. And the reason for this, of course, is that until we experience and encounter new things, we don't really know anything. It's like when you have little kids, or you ever been around little kids, sometimes they don't want to try new things. You have some park you want to take them to that is really fun, and you say, hey, do you guys want to go there? And they're like, no, we don't want to go there. And you think in your mind, you've never even been there. How do you know you don't want to go there, right? But we do this as people, not just children. We resist what is new. Well, this is no less true in faith, in that faith also calls us to move forward and to grow, and that means that faith calls us to explore the unknown. And so we're in the second week of our sermon series of Christ and the hero's journey, and the theme today is this theme that plays out in hero stories, which is that faith calls us, in a certain sense, to leave home, right? Part of faith is leaving what we know. So let's unpack that idea. The first place I want to go with you is the world of stories. I was listening recently to someone who was talking about the wisdom of facing the unknown in faith. And he was pointing out that this is almost a universal idea in human culture, right? You can look at all the religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam. You can look at all the fables of Europe and Asia and Africa and everything. And you go to the great stories of human tradition that many of us know. And pretty much everyone agrees. You have to leave home to become wise. Never does the hero become the hero by staying at home. Never does anyone become wise by simply holding on to exactly what they already know. You have to leave home. And this idea stretches from the ancient world all the way to today. Look at the story of Moses, who has to wander in the wilderness with the Israelites. Look at, if you remember in school, Homer's Odyssey, where this Greek hero has to journey through all these dangers and adventures. Look at the story of King Arthur or Jack and the Beanstalk. Look at, the movie heroes, Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins, Harry Potter. Look at the Disney stories, Lion King, Pinocchio, Moana. To fulfill their destinies, all these characters have to leave home. And without leaving home, they're not going to be confronted with the things that need to confront them to help them grow and learn who they're called to be. Now, let me offer a clarification before I go on about leaving home. Leaving home isn't mainly about journeying somewhere geographically. Don't overly literalize this idea. It doesn't necessarily mean that you leave your home area or your house. You can leave home spiritually or emotionally or mentally and never leave the place you live or never leave the city you're from. But think about it this way. What defines not leaving home is when we assume that God and what's right and what's proper and everything that's important is already in line with me in my priorities, right? That is not leaving home. It's this mindset where God hates exactly what I hate and God loves exactly what I love. And in this mindset, we don't need to ask questions of ourselves or of the world. We don't have to listen to others. We don't have to experience anything new because, we just assume we already have it all figured out. And if we're honest, we have to admit that pretty much all of us like this sort of thing to an extent in our life and faith. We all like to create kind of a Build-A-Bear God. Have you ever seen at the mall, they have these stores for kids called Build-A-Bear, where you can make the bear look exactly what you want it to look like. This is kind of what we do with God, is we create God to be exactly what we want God to be and to think exactly like we think. Because, hey, our opinions are the best opinions out there. Well, conversely, leaving home is about giving up on the idea that our own experiences, our own needs, our own group, our own opinions are at the center of the universe. And it's about embracing that love and life and Jesus actually have something new to teach us. And so, it's about realizing that a lot of what it means to follow Jesus is about trusting God enough to enter into the unknown. And that is a very hard lesson, right? That's what the story of Jonah is about. God calls Jonah to go preach to Nineveh. A little bit of history lesson. So, Jonah is of the Israelites, and Nineveh is this kingdom in Syria, and that was the enemy. It's kind of like saying, go preach to the Taliban, right? That is the mission of Jonah. And, what does he do? He says, I'm going to get on a boat and go to Tarshish. So here's Israel, and Syria is really close up here. Tarshish is the opposite way. We think it's probably modern-day Spain. And what Tarshish represented was the furthest place away that they knew about, right? So God says go left. He goes as far right as he can possibly go. Because, this is what we do when we're called into the unknown. We don't like having to reach out to people who we distrust. And what is the lesson of Jonah? It's basically what happens to him when he goes the other way that God tells him to go. He gets swallowed by a whale, right? In other words, the lesson of Jonah is it doesn't work to ignore what we don't know, to run from what we don't know. If we want to become who we're called to be, we have to face it. And if we look at Jesus' life, you will see that this same theme of exploring the unknown and leaving home constantly comes up. When Jesus is born, you guys remember where he's born? He's born in a manger away from his hometown because Caesar has called the census. Jesus and his family eventually have to flee Israel. It says they lived in Egypt for a number of years, as refugees, by the way, because Herod is threatened by Jesus and is ordering the slaughter of the innocents. And then later, Jesus has to leave civilization when he experiences his call to face temptation in the desert with Satan. So he's leaving home again. And then there's this story where his family are saying, hey, come back to Nazareth. And he says, no, I can't. My mission takes me elsewhere. And so he's on the road doing his ministry. And then finally, Jesus has to leave everything behind, even his life, as he takes up his cross and dies for us all. And as we think about Jesus, kind of the superhero Jesus, it's worth remembering that leaving home was hard even for Jesus. On the night before his crucifixion, you guys remember that story where he's praying in the Mount of Olives, and he prays, if it's possible to take this cup from me, if it's possible to do this another way, God, please save me from this scary unknown known as the cross. But God's answer to the Son of God is that there isn't another way. Transformation and new life happen only through a journey into the unknown, which is the same thing that Jesus offered Matthew in today's gospel story when he says, without any explanation, come and follow me. So what would it mean for us in our lives in 2019 to hear this voice for ourselves that says, follow me? What kind of growth and discovering is God calling you, is God calling us into right here today? Well, really, I can't say what it is for you because it could be almost anything. But I will say that when Jesus calls us into discovering something new, it usually has something to do with learning to love God more or learning to love our neighbor more faithfully. And in some cases, it even has to do with Jesus pointing out to us that the person we want to reject, the person we want to dislike, is actually our neighbor, to even realize that someone is our neighbor. So before I served here, I was in North Dakota, and something interesting happened in the last few years I was there. So North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota, was the site of an organization called Lutheran Social Services. We have a similar organization called Lutheran Family Services here, and it's a social service organization that operates through the Lutheran Church. And it's a beautiful organization, does lots of great things, and one of the things it was involved with in Bismarck, where I lived, was resettling refugees who had worked through the U.S. government and the UN and bringing them in. And so these poor Africans were sent to North Dakota and people from Afghanistan. But they were still thankful because they were usually fleeing incredible violence. And they got vetted and everything. And for many years, this was a source of pride for Lutherans, particularly because, look at what our church is doing, is helping people. And there was this beautiful organization alongside it that my wife was involved with, and I helped a little bit with, called Global Neighbors. And it was just this ragtag group of people, Christians from different areas mostly. They didn't proselytize the refugees, but they just, said when they would come, we would reach out to them and we'd say, how can we help you? Can we help speak English with you? Can we show you how to apply for a job? So it's this beautiful thing. It was this attitude of, you're our new neighbor, welcome. How can we help? And then alongside this reality, there was this guy in a certain town who had a radio show who somehow decided that refugees are all terrorists and evil and lazy, and he started spreading these rumors that LSS is bringing in terrorists. And the sad thing was that many people believed him. LSS started getting all these letters of, why are you bringing in terrorists, and these people are lazy and they're not doing anything. And they were pretty much lies, because we got to know a lot of these people. Most of them worked or were desperately looking for work. Most of them were contributing because they were working to society. Most of them were incredibly nice people. And even the kind of Muslim terrorist thing, many of them were Iraqi Christians who were fleeing violence. And then the ones who weren't, most of the reason they were coming here was they had helped the U.S. government during the war and had been promised what they were being given. And so a lot of people quickly went to this place of demonizing these refugees and dehumanizing them. And I wonder, why was this so easy for some random guy on the radio to do? And the answer was that these people were unknown to them. They didn't know them. They had never met them. They had never tried to meet them. And by the way, I'm not here to speak about the politics of the situation. In terms of how many refugees should be allowed, that's up to politicians, that's up to us as voters. But I'm talking about as human beings to other human beings. How does our heart respond to people? When a new neighbor shows up in our lives, wherever they're from, what is the Christ-like response? Is it to say, I don't know you and I don't want to know you, so get out? Or is it to say to people, you are a fellow child of God, you are my neighbor, so how can I help? Well, I think when we look at Jesus' life and the way he stuck up for outsiders and the downtrodden, the answer is pretty obvious. So that's just one example of a place where maybe Christ is leading us to leave what we know so that we can discover something better, a greater way, discover the love of God in a new way. And again, maybe that's not where God is calling you. Maybe there's something completely different that God is steering you towards. But whatever God is calling for you, may you be open enough and humble enough to listen to God's voice that calls us into a spiritual journey into the unknown. And may we all trust God enough to follow that voice wherever it takes us. Because ultimately, the voice of Jesus always leads us to life. Amen.